Welcome to Death's Door, a game about a crow and killing stuff. There's a bit more to it, but that stuff's not important right now. What is important is the rules for this run. They're pretty simple. I can only use the umbrella as a weapon and can't use any magic to do damage. And for the sake of not waiting too long, let the run begin. We start the game off by entering the hub world and receiving our first assignment, to get a giant soul. We're then informed that if we don't get this soul back, we will start to age until we die, so it's important to retrieve it properly. That's foreshadowing. It's in this hub world that we can pick up our weapon of choice, the umbrella. It's the only weapon in the game that's kinda just lying around, and there's a good reason for that. It is by far the worst weapon in the game, with the lowest attack speed and damage. It shouldn't be too bad, just things might be drawn out a bit. After grabbing it, we head off to the first level. This level serves as more of a tutorial. We're shown how to progress through the maps and shown why magic isn't outright banned in this challenge. We can't use it to do damage, but we need it for traversal. Soon, we come across our first boss, this demonic tree spirit. While this is the easiest boss in the game, it takes quite a while to kill her. Remember how I said our damage and speed suck? Yeah, that's gonna be our main hurdle for this run. Every single enemy we have to hit twice as much, and at half the speed as the basic default sword. Looks like we're gonna be here a while. After finishing off that boss, and finally gathering its soul, it's taken out of our grubby little feathers by this old grey crow. Now we have to go retrieve it. From here we enter the Lost Cemetery, and this will be our hub outside the hub, essentially. From here we can go to the 3 other areas of the game, so it's pretty important. While trying to find the guy who stole our soul, we come across a shrine. There are 16 of these shrines in the game, 8 of which upgrade your health, and 8 of which upgrade your magic, which we're not gonna need. For every 4 shrines you find, you get an extra hit point, so while they're all good to grab, I'm not going to cover every one of them because it would be pretty boring. Just know that throughout this run, I'm picking these up whenever I can. Anyways, moving forward, we come across our second boss fight of the run, the Guardian of the Door. Being early on in the game, this fight's pretty easy. However, it's now that the monotony and slowness of this run really starts to veer its ugly head. Since the fights are so long now, getting hit at all is a detriment. There's no way to heal while in combat. So, with us only having 4 hit points, we can only get hit 4 times before we die. Add that to the sheer amount of time we're spending in boss fights, and I think you can see the issue for later on in this run. After about a 4.5 minute boss fight, I finally kill him. After this, we make it to the guy who stole our giant soul, and he's standing in front of a massive door. We're informed that this door is Death's Door. Hey, that's the name of the game. And that our giant soul was just given to it. In order to get our giant soul back and prevent our aging, we need to help this guy since there's a soul he needs from the door as well. According to him, we need 3 more giant souls in order to open the door and retrieve our contracted souls. So, it's off to the first giant. At this point, we're introduced to the main gameplay loop of this game. Each giant has its own area with an introduction. After this introduction, the area is split into 3 main chunks. The first one is a puzzle chunk where you complete puzzles and gain 4 crow souls to open up a door and get a new ability. After that, we use this ability to traverse another section of the area. Finally, there will be an enemy gauntlet before the boss at the end. Now that we've entered the first chunk of Manor, which is this area, we can begin looking for the 4 crow souls. We have to search around the area and find these battle rooms, as I'll call them. These battle rooms usually consist of waves of enemies or 1 advanced enemy. Later on, they do start to mix together, but for the most part, it's either enemies or 1 advanced enemy. Once making it there, this first battle room thankfully only has 1 advanced enemy. For this enemy, I need to break his shield before doing damage to him. Afterwards, it's just avoiding attacks and getting hits in when I can. After that, we've received the first crow soul. Not long after, we find the second battle room, and this one is a good amount harder than the last. This one still has just 1 advanced enemy, but it will continuously spawn smaller enemies during the fight. The problem comes when you realize these smaller enemies don't stop respawning. They will continue to spawn until Big Boy here kicks the bucket. Thanks to how low my damage output is right now, this becomes a pretty big issue. While it is difficult, it does teach me that patience is key. It's only when I get greedy and try to take hits that I shouldn't go for that I get hit. After dying here quite a few times, I finally make it past and get the second crow soul. The next battle room also has one of these advanced enemies paired with 2 teleporting magic users. While it's not easy, it's easier than the last one and I end up taking it down pretty quickly. The next crow soul is a bit trickier to get. Rather than just having one battle room before grabbing it, there is a room with a larger, normal enemy that leads into a dark room with a lot of small enemies. Sound confusing? It kind of is. But after fighting through these 2 rooms and lighting up the second one, I am granted with the final soul. After that, we can unlock this door that takes us to a chest with our first new ability. A chest that decides to eat us. This takes us to the first avarice of the run. These are short enemy gauntlets with 4 waves. This first one absolutely kicked my ass. It's pretty difficult to deal with due to how many enemies are on the screen during the waves. The first 3 waves aren't anything bad, but the last one is a real trial. It introduces one of those advanced enemies from before, but this time with a bunch of enemies. Several tries later, and I end up beating it, as well as learning that crowd control is absolutely essential to this run. Upon leaving, we are gifted with the flame spell. Getting back to Manor, we can now head to the traversal section of this area. There's nothing much of note happening during this section, so I'm just gonna skip it. After using our newfound ability to light a bunch of furnaces, we enter the enemy gauntlet section. It's the same thing as the traversal section, just with a bunch of enemies scattered about. Before long, we make it to the first giant's boss fight, and it's against the Witch of Urns, Grandma. Grandma only has a couple different phases. During the first phase, she teleports around and will try to throw urns at us. During her second phase, she jumps into the urn that's on her head and bounces around while trying to crush us. After that, she'll then lay on her side while still in the pot and spin in a circle, shooting projectiles at us. After that, she goes back to phase 1 and repeats. Once you get her pattern down, she's really predictable and not too difficult. Soon after, Grandma meets her maker. After that, we get a brief introduction to the Lord of Doors. While he does seem a bit threatening, it's probably not going to be an issue later. That's also foreshadowing. Now with one giant soul in our pocket, it's off to the next section of the game. It's at this point that I'll briefly touch on the upgrades in this game. They are strength, dexterity, haste, and magic, with the magic one not mattering. Strength increases your damage, dexterity increases your attack speed, and haste increases your base speed and lowers the cooldown between dodges. While I did allow these for the run, each upgrade to each individual tree is pretty minor as to prevent you from over-leveling before you're meant to. Now we enter the Overgrown ruins. Same basic concept as the last area, introduction and some traversal and a new ability. I'll skip over this bit of the outside stuff because not much happens in the way of this challenge. Once we make it inside this area's dungeon, we're introduced to 4 new battle rooms. This first one is just a basic enemy gauntlet, but this time there's a flower, and if you hit it, it shoots out a projectile, damaging anything it hits. I will allow the use of this flower for the run, primarily because there's a couple enemies in this room that cannot be hit otherwise. This is because once you get close to them, they'll bury themselves in the ground, making it impossible to hit them without magic. In the next battle room, we're introduced to another advanced enemy type. Unfortunately, this one doesn't spawn alone. Also, rather than just needing to fight one, we need to take down multiple of them. This is when the attack speed really starts causing issues. Normally, you can get off a couple hits before they swing once, but in this case, I can only swing once before getting hit. It's nothing too terrible, but again, draws out this section longer than it should be. This room alone ends up killing me quite a bit, though eventually I do make it out. The third battle room was almost my breaking point for this run. Remember the advanced enemy from the waves in the last one? They make a return in this one, threefold. The first couple waves are exactly like the last one, except the third wave is just 3 of these goobers and a couple normal enemies. This one room took me around 30 minutes to complete, much longer than any other room has. After getting my shit kicked in around a dozen or so times, I finally collect the soul. The last battle room is much the same as the last ones, just a good bit easier. After all of that, it's into our next avarice. This one is much more difficult due to the sheer amount of enemies per each wave. That being said, I beat it on my first try. And with that, we unlock the bomb spell. Heading back to the dungeon, we encounter the traversal and enemy gauntlet sections of this area. Traversal is just, well, traversal. But the enemy bit really kicks it up a notch. Rather than just being groups of enemies along a path, this one takes on more of a unlocking a direct path approach. The direct path is split up into sections. You have to clear each one of these sections and then pull a lever to open up the main path. After a couple tough sections in the gauntlet, we make it to the boss, the Frog King. This guy is pretty easy. He hops around on his little stick thing, and once he stops, you slap him in the back. Simple. You know, until it isn't. This fight has one primary gimmick. With all of the Frog King's attacks, he'll take apart the platform I'm on. After taking out a few chunks, he'll land on the platform for a moment before jumping off and starting to wear away at it again. This means that the platform is constantly on a timer and we need to find a way to reset it. This is where the stick thing on his back comes in. If we hit it before he starts to tear away at the platform again, we can reset the missing pieces. Thankfully, if he's facing away from the platform, there is a brief moment where we can run up to the edge and hit it ourselves. Unfortunately, this does put us at a risk of falling off and taking damage. Thankfully, that is just a risk and not a guarantee. Another thing is that this guy is almost constantly attacking or out of range of our attacks. While it doesn't make it impossible without magic, it does draw it out significantly longer than it normally would be. Luck is on our side, however, and this man is predictable as hell. Bro has 2 attacks. If he's on the right side, he'll tilt the platform towards him and suck in random sections, then slam down onto the platform before jumping to the other side. If he's on the left side, he'll shoot 6 projectiles onto the platform, destroying those sections, before slamming down and jumping to the other side again. He'll repeat these actions until death. Needless to say, with how predictable he is, his death comes swiftly. With his soul now in our pocket, we head to the final giant and section, the Stranded Sailor. Sadly, this section has nothing to do with water. The dungeon of this area is Castle Lockstone, which actually serves as 2 different puzzle sections. The first one is getting the 4 crow souls, and the second being a way to unlock the elevator to go to the next sections. Thankfully, every battle room in this section consists of 3 waves of enemies. Granted, some of those enemies are more difficult than what we've seen before, but overall, none of them gave me too much trouble. After we get those 4 souls, it's off to the last Avarice. This is much like the last one, just with more difficult enemies. These enemies are harder not only because they're more complicated to deal with, but also because they have more health. The 4th wave of this Avarice is significantly more difficult than any other wave in any of the others. There is this Smo looking guy who hits pretty erratically. He has a chance to hit in between 1 and 3 times with little indication between each variation. This paired with his massive health pool, and I'm in for a bad time. This also sucks because it's the final wave, which means I need to conserve my health as much as possible through the other 3 to stand a real chance against this guy. After around 20 minutes of tries, I finally take him down. That then awards us with the Hook Shot spell. Thankfully, this one has less to do with combat and more to do with traversal. Now all we need to do is head back to Castle Lockstone and finish up the second half of the puzzle section. For this section, we need to find 4 fires and light them. After we do that, an elevator will come down taking us to the enemy gauntlet section. On the way there, we find the camp of free crows. Here we find out that the crows no longer want to listen to the Lord of Doors, and they want things to go back the way they used to be. However, the only way to truly break free is to deal with the lords. Surely that won't be our problem, right? At this point in the run, I also want to take the time to go and get the rest of the health shrines. I'm getting close to the end game and I'm wanting max health because I know what's coming. Now for the final enemy gauntlet. This is also the last section of the game that even has enemies to kill, so they really don't hold back. Not only is there numerous basic enemies, but there's also several more advanced difficult enemies scattered about as well. Paired with this, there's also multiple sections that won't let you progress until after you've killed a couple waves of enemies. These waves consisting of both basic and advanced enemies. After several deaths and multiple attempts, I finally make it to the boss of this area. Betty. Betty is a bit of a special case boss. She's hyper aggressive, but easy to deal with. During her first phase, she'll jump around slamming onto the ground, swiping towards you if you're too close. She'll also occasionally yell, but that doesn't do much to you in terms of damage. However, she will randomly do a quick jump in the air and not slam down, and that leads into her second phase. In this phase, she'll roll towards you 3 times, bouncing off the wall and slamming down after each roll. She does this until about half health. Once she's around 50% HP, she has a random chance to enter a brief phase 3 where she throws a snowball towards you. If she does this, it's pretty easy to dodge. But then once she gets really low on health, probably around 20-25%, snowballs will start to rain down from the roof, with shadows indicating where they're gonna land. As long as you're paying attention, they're also pretty easy to dodge, but it makes dodging her more difficult. After a while, I finally take her down. One thing that I wanted to mention real quick was that this was a constant 5-minute fight. There's 2 more fights after this, and with her taking this long to take down, it's got me worried for the last 2. We meet back up with the crow from earlier and give him all 3 giant souls. This opens the door, and we head inside. Inside, we meet Death. We also discovered that the Lords of Doors have made a pact with him, and they now take care of souls needing to die. However, everyone needs to die at some point, and the current Lord of Doors doesn't want to die, so we locked away Death in this chamber. We also learned that the souls fed to the door are lost to the ether and therefore unobtainable. This tidbit of info sends the crow over the edge and he turns hostile. He too doesn't want to die, and he's willing to fight us and Death in order to stay alive. Death rightfully gets his ass out of there, so we're left to deal with this. Now, this fight is a doozy. So this guy doesn't really have phases, just attacks he'll alternate through. The main troublemaker of this fight is his running attack. He constantly moves towards the player, and if we collide with him, we take damage. Except we need to get close to him to do damage since we can't use magic. Also, I'm sure you've already seen, but whenever you hit him, crow heads will come off of him and act as projectiles that will also damage us. While these aren't too bad in their own right, they come out of him randomly. So there is a chance, albeit a small one, that one of these crow heads will immediately hit us after we hit him. Thankfully, we are also able to use these heads as projectiles to hit the boss. It's a little tricky and not too reliable, but if we hit them towards him, there's a chance they'll hit him and do some damage. All this means is that I have to be incredibly careful and look out for openings in order to get a hit in. At around 50% health, he'll shoot out a black hole thing that tries to pull you in, but if you get far enough away from it, it doesn't matter. Also, once he gets real low, he'll start to summon small crows that will latch onto you and slow down your movement speed. For these, all you need to do is just swing your weapon a couple times and they'll die off. After an embarrassingly high amount of attempts due to me getting greedy, I do eventually take them down. Also, for anyone who is curious, the winning attempt took right at 7 minutes to complete. Way longer than this fight has any right to be. After we make it out of that hellscape, we meet back up with Death and learn that we need to confront the Lord of Doors in order to fully release him from this prison. After making it back to the main hub area, it seems like all of the other crows are also in agreement. Now for the final fight of the game, the Lord of Doors. I'm just gonna say this outright, this fight was hard. Like, there was so much to this fight, and he was so fast and so erratic, and it's just so difficult, and oh, it's done. Just kidding, we're not getting off that easily. This is a multi-stage fight. It's pretty cool because it takes you through the different sections of the game that we've visited previously, as well as having some basic traversal sections in between. Also, another thing is that with each area we visit, he'll gain a new ability just like the past bosses. The first one, he'll start to lob bombs at us. The second one, he'll do a slam down aerial attack. And the last one, he'll just roll towards us 3 times. While I did die a couple times in this beginning part, there's a good amount of checkpoints throughout it, so it's nothing too difficult. That is until we reach the main hub once again. Now he's waiting there and the real fight begins. We're trapped in an arena with him and he has access to all of his past moves and a couple new ones. The first of these new attacks is he'll clap, causing a spell to come over us, drastically slowing down our movement speed and not letting us attack. Thankfully, just spamming the dodge button lets us out. The next one, and the last one, is an overhead laser attack with bowls that will run across the arena from side to side. While this attack doesn't last very long, it was one of the main ones that caused me to take damage. After a few attempts and another 7-minute long boss fight, the Lord of Doors finally dies. And with that, we can say for certain that yes, you can beat Death's Door with only the umbrella. If you did like this video, liking and subscribing would help the channel out. YouTube thinks that you'll like this video, so you should click on it and see if they're right. Anyways, have a good one, and I'll see you later.